Some FBI field agents then argued to prosecutors that they were inclined to believe Trump. That may be the single most astonishing sentence ever written that includes the words FBI agents and Trump. Some FBI field agents then argued to prosecutors that they were inclined to believe Trump. In what decade could that sentence possibly be written? Donald Trump was already the subject, along with his father, of a federal civil rights investigation by the Justice Department in the 1970s, when the Trump company's racist practices got them dragged into court in New York by the Justice Department. Some FBI field agents then argued to prosecutors that they were inclined to believe Trump. I have that sentence memorized because I just couldn't believe what my eyes were seeing when I read that today in the Washington Post. There couldn't possibly be anyone in the FBI thinking that after 2011, when Donald Trump started publicly lying about Barack Obama's birth certificate. What FBI agent would ever believe that guy? Some FBI field agents then argued to prosecutors that they were inclined to believe Trump. That sentence appears in the middle of the Washington Post's breakthrough reporting today under the headline, "Showdown Before the Raid, FBI agents and prosecutors argued over Trump." FBI agents were inclined to believe Trump after the Washington Post methodically chronicled 30,573 public lies told by Trump during his presidency. That doesn't include all of the lies Donald Trump has told about the presidential election after he left office and all the other lies Donald Trump has told after he left office. Those same FBI agents have heard every one of those lies, and they were inclined to believe Trump. FBI agents who are screened for aptitude in detecting truth were inclined to believe Trump. FBI agents who were trained by what, at its very best, is the most sophisticated law enforcement agency on the planet. They were inclined to believe Trump. Some FBI field agents then argued to prosecutors that they were inclined to believe Trump and his team had delivered everything the government sought to protect, and said the Bureau should close down its criminal investigation, according to some people familiar with the discussions. That was in June of last year, after federal prosecutors served a subpoena on Donald Trump for the return of all government records, including classified documents that Donald Trump still had in his possession. On June 3rd at Mar-a-Lago, in response to the subpoena, Trump lawyer Evan Corcoran gave Jay Bratt, the chief of the counterintelligence division at the Justice Department, 38 classified records, along with an affidavit signed by Trump lawyer Christina Bobb, saying that they had completed what they called a diligent search of the Trump property and that all records subject to the subpoena were being handed over right there at that moment on that day. And that was good enough for some FBI officials. Some FBI field agents then argued to prosecutors that they were inclined to believe Trump and his team had delivered everything the government sought to protect, and said the Bureau should close down its criminal investigation. Close it down on June 3rd. If those FBI agents got their way, Donald Trump would still have in his possession in Florida more than 100 classified records, 18 of them top secret, along with thousands of pages of government documents that were seized 2 months later with a search warrant that those same FBI agents argued against. With the FBI, you have to learn to take the good with the bad. That has been true every day of the 115-year history of the Federal Bureau of Investigation under FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover, who ran the FBI for 48 years. The FBI did some excellent work, and it did some truly evil work at the very same time. There is no more vile episode in the history of American law enforcement than what J. Edgar Hoover tried to do to the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. There have always been smart FBI agents, brave FBI agents, and there have always been bad FBI agents. In the Boston field office, FBI agent John Connolly from South Boston was at first praised for his ability to obtain useful intelligence on some of the gangsters who grew up in the same South Boston neighborhood that John Connolly did. If you knew John Connolly, as I briefly did, when he was thought to be an honest FBI agent, you can never regard the FBI with blind admiration. John Connolly may be watching this program right now, tonight, at home, finally, after being released from prison 2 years ago at age 80, having served time for his deep criminal involvement with Boston's Whitey Bulger, including in a conspiracy to murder. The good with the bad. You have to learn to do that. You have to take the good with the bad with the FBI, as you do with any other law enforcement agency. Today's breakthrough reporting by the Washington Post is a story of the good and the bad. Nothing as bad as John Connolly, but it's a story that includes the concept that FBI agents were inclined to believe Trump. I'm not inclined to believe that. I do believe that is what was presented to the Washington Post reporters, but I refuse to believe there were any FBI agents who were inclined to believe Trump. They couldn't possibly be that stupid, but they could be corrupt. They could be trying to go easy on Donald Trump because they like him. Just that human element of it. They could be trying to go easy on Donald Trump because they're Republicans. But it simply could not be that they were inclined to go easy on Trump because they were inclined to believe him. That is impossible. The Washington Post reports that FBI agents in the Washington field office had sought to slow the probe. Slow the probe. This is a story of FBI agents trying to slow down prosecutors, exactly the opposite of what you're used to seeing on TV and the movies, where the prosecutors are always slowing down those overeager police investigators. While FBI agents were trying to slow down the investigation of Donald Trump's illegal possession of government documents, Merrick Garland was publicly repeating the notion that no one is above the law. Some FBI agents did not believe that, according to the Washington Post reporting. Some inside the probe argued the infighting delayed the search by months, ultimately reducing the time prosecutors had to reach a decision on possible charges. Here's Carol Leonnig, one of the reporters on the Washington Post story.
We discovered that the prosecutors believed they were very close to the end, close to making a charging decision when Donald Trump announced on November 15th that he would run for re-election. 3 days later, Merrick Garland, the Attorney General, summoned prosecutors and investigators on that team to his office to let them know he was going to appoint a special counsel and encourage them to consider joining the special counsel's team. So basically the work was fractions away, yards away from being completed. And I think that's pretty important that now Jack Smith, who one of his first actions was the one that prosecutors still hadn't tidied up at the end of their probe, and that was getting the lawyer for Donald Trump, Evan Corcoran, inside a grand jury to answer, what did your client tell you to do, and where did he tell you to search when you said all classified records at Mar-a-Lago had been returned? Because obviously that was not the truth, and that's the heart of this.
A month after prosecutor Jay Bratt went to Florida to be handed those 38 classified documents, he wanted to obtain a search warrant to search the Trump property. But the prosecutors learned FBI agents were still loath to conduct a surprise search. They also heard from top FBI officials that some agents were simply afraid. They worried taking aggressive steps investigating Trump could blemish or even end their careers. Jay Bratt and other top Justice Department officials took the unprecedented step of going to FBI headquarters to present them with a draft search warrant. Quote, Stephen M. D'Antuono Then the head of the FBI Washington field office, which was running the investigation, was adamant the FBI should not do a surprise search. He repeatedly urged that the FBI instead seek to persuade Corcoran to agree to a consensual search of the property. Tempers ran high in the meeting. Bratt raised his voice at times and stressed to the FBI agents that the time for trusting Trump and his lawyer was over. D'Antuono asked if Trump was officially the subject of the criminal investigation. What does that matter? Bratt replied. Bratt said the most important fact was that highly sensitive government records probably remained at Mar-a-Lago and could be destroyed or spirited away if the FBI did not recover them soon. You haven't swayed me, D'Antuono replied. Luckily for America, Jay Bratt won. And on August 5th, a search warrant was served and Jay Bratt was vindicated by collecting over 100 classified records, 18 of them top secret, along with thousands of more pages of government documents. The Washington Post says the documents, quote, involved highly restricted special access programs that require cabinet-level sign-off even for officials with top-secret clearances to review. The documents described Iran's missile program and records related to highly sensitive intelligence aimed at China. Even with Stephen D'Antuono, the FBI official who, according to the Washington Post, was the largest roadblock in conducting the investigation, there is the good and the bad. D'Antuono and some fellow FBI officials complained about how bad it would look for agents with FBI emblazoned on their jackets to invade a former president's home. He was right about that. And that worry is what led to the FBI decision to dress inconspicuously in white polo shirts and khakis when they served that search warrant. It may seem like a small point, but it was a good result of that argument. And because they were not conspicuously marked as FBI agents, the news media did not catch on. We discovered that the FBI served a search warrant on Donald Trump only when Donald Trump himself decided to make that public at the end of that day. We did not find out because there were a bunch of guys in marked FBI jackets on the property. Stephen D'Antuono's obstructionism in the investigation, as reported by the Washington Post, if accurate, may have saved Donald Trump from facing criminal charges last September or October. Stephen D'Antuono resigned from the FBI in December of last year. As of tonight, we do not know how many FBI field agents are still working at the FBI, who are still inclined to believe Trump.